Welcome to Seat at the Table, where we believe technical skills will get you in the room, but your soft skills and business acumen will earn you a seat at the table. My name is Jerich and I am the host. We took a break at the end of Q4 and we're back at it. Thank you, Sans, for this platform and for an opportunity to have these amazing conversations. You know, every time we have one of these conversations, we speak with leaders across different verticals, different industries, diving into topics that will prepare and equip cybersecurity leaders by extracting the hard-earned lessons from the years of experience each of our guests bring to the show. Today's guest is the incomparable Dutch Schwartz. Me and him finished a fantasy football season with other security leaders in the industry where there was ample trash talk,
Yes, sir.
blended with security insights, and I figured it's about time we take these conversations off, take the conversations we have off camera and share them with the world. Dutch, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks, man. I'm thrilled that we finally got this connected. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And for those that aren't familiar with you, can you give us a brief introduction into you, your role, your background, what you're about?
Sure. Yeah, so background-wise, former military officer, and then been in IT, originally networking, storage, probably like a lot of people, different domains. Been in security for about, 8, maybe 10 years actually at this point. And I'm a security strategist for a leading cloud service provider. So what I do is spend my time with CISOs like you and really help them accelerate their journey into the cloud, taking their processes, and their focus and making sure that it's secure in the cloud domain.
Yeah. For everybody out there, he's being really modest. His job is to advise CISOs and execs, and as a result, he's seen some high and some low caliber leaders. Today, we're going to pick his brain about the characteristics of both. You ready to hop in, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's see. So Peter Drucker, he says, asking good questions is the most central skill of a leader. John Maxwell says, good leaders ask great questions. I'm curious, what types of questions do the most successful CISOs ask you?
Yeah, it's great because that's one of the biggest differentiators I see. So to quantify it, the really successful CISOs ask why questions. So they frame it, they'll give you some context with their situation, some color around that, and then they'll ask you a why question. And then they'll double click on that, right? And so what I see them doing is they're looking for downstream impacts, right? They're looking for implications of the actions that we're considering doing, whether it's a strategy or a program or a specific tool. And they're always thinking about, what does this mean to my people, the workflow? How does this impact the business, right? So they're mostly why questions. And the difference with that relative to what I see is sort of less robust or, not as mature just in terms of timeline and maybe time and seat, those CISOs ask a lot of what questions, like what is this thing, what does it do? Sometimes they'll ask how questions, which are a little bit better, but they very rarely ask why. So that's probably the biggest difference between those two types of CISOs.
So Simon Sinek has a book called Start With Why.
Right.
And so I can appreciate starting with why, but where does it go from there? Because you can only ask why so much before we get to the what. Is it based off of your response, or how does that work?
So it's the framing of all of those things together, right? So if we start on a whiteboard session, it's really easy for anybody, right, me included, to ground ourselves in the what, right? You have to, right? That's the basic building blocks. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the milestones? What are those outcomes, right? But we have to start building up from there. And so what you're trying to do is bridge where we are today to where we're headed tomorrow. And that bridge that connects those two things is strategy, right? Strategy is that big how, right? That this is how we're going to do this, right? And I need to give you enough guidance as a leader of leaders so that we stay aligned, but that individuals or small teams can make trade-offs. Strategy is all about making trade-offs. It's about making decisions. And so that's a critical piece for successful CISOs, or the more successful CISOs, is having a strategy that is, again, aligns everybody across the domains and keeps everybody moving, but they can make good decisions. And then what that how does is it leads to the future, right? To that vision, like where are we headed with this, right? So we might spend an hour talking about, here's my tech stack today, here's the milestones, here's some of the implications of that, here's the politics, here's the business things that I have to deal with. But often when we get through that first hour, we have to step back and I say, okay, why are we doing this? I don't mean this like flippantly, but like, what is the big why here for the business? Not for us, right? I understand what we're trying to accomplish here because we talk a lot about what and how we're going to do it, and that's pretty obvious, right? But why does this help the business, right? So I'm looking for something that sounds like this is for improved customer experience. It's to increase innovation. It's to decrease something. It's to make my customers thrilled. Like you have to have a big why, and it feels, I know, sometimes fluffy, but you have to have that because that's what aligns people. It's what people get jazzed up about. So they feel like they're making an impact, right? If you just give them a narrow task, they can check that off. But the sense of satisfaction and fulfillment you get from that is very different than Jerich told me to do a thing. I went and did a thing. I might feel good about the task, but did I grow? And do I really understand what that means? Because I have to understand the why to help me put things in context, to make choices, and to help me understand where I'm headed. Like, what am I doing to help the business? If I don't understand what I'm doing, then it's tactical. So that's the other thing. Great CISOs ask strategic questions, right? Again, strategy is about alignment and big picture things. Tactics are down here. I'm not being, dismissive. You have to have this, right? But tactics are for me or you. If I was the admin, or if I was the incident responder, if I was the architect, right? Tactical, I can do it by myself, or I can do it with a small team of people. That's tactical. Strategy, by definition, crosses the boundaries across HR, IT, finance, logistics. That's strategy. And that's the difference between those two levels, right? Is that when you come from a keyboard up, right, background, it's great because it grounds you. You can vibe out with your people. You can empathize. Oh, I know what it was like to be on the help desk. I know what it's like to be in the SOC. That's super valuable. But as you grow, right, either in size or up through the company, you have to start, sort of letting some of that go, and you have to lean into the business aspects of that. And you've really got to understand, why are we doing this for the business and our customers?
Yeah, you made a lot of good points there, and I was trying to listen and not come up with a response. So I'm going to start with the last thing you said, because I was listening, active listening at work here, people. The strategic aspect of it versus the tactical, it's more about the why, and the strategic is at a larger, higher altitude.
Yes.
And from that why comes a how. And that how is a little bit more tactical. And the CISOs should be looking from a strategic perspective, and their teams should be looking at the more tactical ways that they're going to achieve said strategy. I think that's what I heard here, and I'm fully in agreement with that. I want to go back to why, because I think there's a lot of power in why. One, I'm curious, do you see people asking you why, or do you see them asking their own organizations why? So I'm curious how a consultant would have an answer to a why. And then the second thing I'll say is, I think why is also important when you give out instruction, right? I try to tell people why they're doing it, because it actually helps them understand, and it empowers them to take the steps that are necessary to achieve it, even if it means going outside of some of the bounds that I've prescribed. But I threw out a lot at you there, so I'll pause.
So the first part, in terms of, do they ask why, right? Like when I'm in a consultative or an advisory role, again, the more experienced, right, the people who have an understanding of kind of how strategy works, they do ask those questions. So they'll ask, why would we do it this way versus that way? What are my trade-offs there? And maybe the trade-offs in my mind, right, is because I might be thinking about workflow, right? I'm like, hey, this is more efficient. And they're like, I'm not as concerned about that. I'm concerned about data privacy, And so it goes both ways. I can tell you there have been times when I walked into an advisory engagement. We were whiteboarding for 4 hours and eating sandwiches, and I thought I understood why we were doing the thing. And I've been wrong. So I'll give you an example, kind of an anonymous example. I was working with a company in the retail space, and I thought the why, like what are we trying to protect, was formulas, right? Because in my mind, just as a consumer, I thought those were important. And it wasn't until like we had our sleeves rolled up, we're eating sandwiches, and all of a sudden I was like, hey, I just want to check, like, is that the most critical thing to you? And the CISO's like, oh, global CISO's like, nope, time out. I can see why you would think that. No, the most critical thing to me are my marketing campaigns. If that were to be out there in the wild, that would be very damaging. And it just blew my mind. And this was years, maybe 6-7 years ago, but it made me reset. And I can't say I always do it, but I have to make sure I'm asking, like, why are we doing this? What's that higher thing, right? Because it might present in any environment as, I'm trying to solve a botnet problem, or I'm trying to solve like some kind of technical problem, because it's easy. Like it's concrete, it's tangible. We all get that, right? And I've seen instances where we have multiple efforts, statements of work from multiple parties trying to solve that technical thing. And at some point, I have to kind of pull back on the collector and say, hey, why are we doing this? Like, I don't mean that, flippantly, but like, what is the higher thing we're trying to connect to? And in one case with a different retail customer, what we really decided was, hey, it's really about customer experience, right? When I read your letter to the shareholders, one of your 3 things is world's greatest customer service. And
right.
That would impact the customer experience, right? So when we did it that way, when I reframed it with the C-levels, CIO, CISO, deputy CISO, et cetera, that changed the discussions that we then had with the CFO and the CRO and the various VPs of the different areas, because we're like, hey, I don't want to bore you with this $4 million project around botnets, because I'll nerd out and you'll get bored, right? Here's here's why we need to do this. If we don't do this, it would interrupt the experience of our customers. Boom, light goes on. CFO's like, I got you, I get it, right? And I'm not saying it was like one day and we solved it, but I mean, it just changed it, because I was looking at 11 different SOWs and going, hey, wait, let's step back, guys. Like, we're running so fast and hard, and we're solving problems, and it feels like we're making progress. But if I was the CFO, would I understand that? If I was the CEO, I don't know that I would, right? So I try to go both ways. I try to make sure I understand the why, because it's easy to assume what that critical thing is. And then if it's not present to me, I'll ask that question. And sometimes we'll be down a level or 2, right? It's I've been told I'm going to try to improve my mean time to detection or mean time to response. Hey, big fan, get it, like, do that, right? Do that thing. But my next question is, okay, why? And then I just wait for them to get there. And sometimes it's just like, oh, and they just kind of readjust and go, oh, okay, it's because of, XYZ thing. And I can even say it, I've been at 5 Fortune 500 companies, so big companies myself, so I can sort of pick on my own companies. I've been in those exact same kind of meetings where there's a specific topic and it's technical. We need to buy a insert thing here. Doesn't even matter what the thing is, right? And then I'll be in there with geniuses, and I'm like, hey, time out, like, why are we doing this again? Like, just make sure I understand, and I'll have to kind of pull it up and go, well, what would your boss say? I don't think that we went to the board and asked for X million dollars to do an XDR. I don't really think that was how the conversation went, at least not in my experience. So what did we tell them? Is it because we're trying to improve our security maturity? Is it because, so you have to kind of pull it up, right? So you stay up there, because to your earlier comment, the second part of your question there, it allows the teams then to make intelligent choices. They need that, because you can't be there in the trenches with them with your hands on the keyboards anymore. So you've got to give them that, so that when something presents itself to them, either time-wise or effort-wise or criticality, they can make that choice. And they can feel confident, oh, I know this choice aligns with what Jerich told me is the big why. I'll circle back with him at appropriate time, or the workflow will catch up, or the reporting or the matrix or whatever later. But right now, I'm going to make the right choice, right? As opposed to, I just know I need to deploy this thing.
I love that. And we can't talk about the good questions without talking about the bad ones.
Yes.
So what are some of the bad questions that you get asked?
Yeah. The bad questions are, can you explain to me the relative merits of blue knob, red knob? Can you explain to me the how you've seen, it's not in of itself a terrible question, but how do you see vendor A play out or vendor B play out? Or by the vendor, it could be partner, it could be integrate, but another party. How have you seen it? And it's okay to start there. But again, I've seen that drive down. And at one point I had a CISO who's new to being a CISO, right? In fairness. And we were having lunch. I wasn't involved. Like I was just sort of, somebody he knew as sort of an advisory capacity. And we had a long discussion about two different vendors, which is fine, over lunch. And eventually I said, hey, does this really matter? And he was sort of like, what? I go, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but like, does this really matter? And I said, let me play this forward. In a year from now, I get that there's somebody on your team who really cares. I get that, man. I'm not taking it away. But like, you've been in this role like 3-4 weeks. In a year, will this matter to you? Or frankly, to your boss, who's the CIO or the CTO? If the answer is no, like we need to step back, man. Like we need to reframe this. That's not a great one. Hey, I have this insert thing. I have this issue with scripting. I have this issue with something very tactical. And again, I'm happy to have that conversation, right, and whiteboard that out, and then have to say, okay, cool. So, what does this mean? Like, what does this mean to your boss, or your boss's boss, or the board, or like, I kind of have to keep going until it clicks, And if it's not obvious, I say, hey, is it one of these 5 things? So they found there's generally the same types of initiatives, right? And so it's these really tactical questions about a tool, a feature. Let's be clear. I love that stuff too. Okay. And I'm happy to, jam out with you, and you can show me your Raspberry Pi that does your home brew kit in your garage. Like I love that too. Okay. But that's a real story, right? And I understand even the giving up of your stripes, right? So I was enlisted as an officer. I'm completely empathetic. I understand exactly how that feels, right? I used to be the person doing the thing, and then I was in charge of people, right, over time. And you have to let some of that go and be comfortable with that is the right thing, because you can't make big strategic decisions and think and connect to the other executives if you're down here on a consistent basis. It's cool if you want to dive down and, hey, man, and sometimes you can do it on an empathetic way, right? Like, hey, man, show that off to me. Like, dude, jump it. Let me show you in the console. What are you guys doing? That, right? That's appropriate, but you can't stay there. You got to be up here. What is the business of your business? How do you make money? Are you OpEx or CapEx intensive? What is happening with your margins? Do you understand return on invested capital? Do you understand the business of the business? That is the difference. The questions are down here, and I will kind of pulse them and be like, hey, how do you think about risk? And if the answer to me comes back as, oh, I have to be compliant with insert compliance things here. Got it. That's not how you think about risk. Okay. Compliance mechanisms, you got to do them, right? I had a conversation with a CISO at one point at that kind of level. And I said, can I give you an analogy? We're sitting in your corporate office. I see a sprinkler system right here. That's compliance. You must do that thing. You're going to be audited for said thing. It's important. I agree with you. But does that impact the lives of your customers? Does it change the way that you go to market and compete in the marketplace? It's rhetorical. The answer is no. You have to have it. I'm not being flippant. You need to have that, right? But that doesn't drive things, right? You have to come up here and say, what are we doing to impact the business?
So many good points that you made there. The big thing that I heard was the questions that are asked are good questions. Those just aren't questions that you should be getting asked by the CISO.
Right.
At least not consistently. If in the middle of 10 other really good ones, that one comes out, maybe he doesn't have confidence in his team that focuses on that specific thing, so he's going deeper. And I like to say that I'm strategically tactical, and that there are times when it makes sense for me to geek out, but the majority of the time, that's not why I'm getting paid the medium bucks, right? And so that makes complete sense to me. So let's actually talk about the title of the show, right? Characteristics of great CISOs. What are some of the indicators that give you an impression that you are working with a leader that has a well-run security program?
Yeah, the indicators are a couple. One, they can articulate what the top business initiatives are for the year. I mean, I know it sounds simple, but that's a really great indicator, right? Even better if they have it on, a slide, or they have some kind of viewpoint on that. But if they can explain to me, hey, what's in section 1A of your risk if you're a public company in the United States, right? And then what is the security lens that you've put on top of that, right? If they can do that comfortably, that tells me it's an indicator that they've got a mature program. If they've got a viewpoint on how they think about aspects of risk, hey, I'll give you a simple one. This year, I'm really leaning towards the NIST CSF function of protect. And here's why I'm doing that, right? Like at a high level, then you can start to align all kinds of things. Again, doesn't mean you're ignoring the other four, right? But when you have some focus, right, that you can explain to me and why you're doing that. But when I see them explaining and investing in their teams, that's a big indicator to me, right? So we talk a lot about, continuity planning, disaster recovery, because it's the nature of our roles. But what about within your team, right? You have to be preparing your people. And if you can't go on vacation and be out of pocket for 10 days, that's a problem in my worldview, right? And I say that lovingly, having been a commander of people in the military. Like, you have to be able to go for two reasons that are really paramount. Number one, mentally and emotionally, you have to be able to step out, right? Like, you cannot stay up here, right? There's a million studies that show you can't be at 80%, 90% every day, all day long. You just can't do it. You have to have that time, and you'll come back recharged, more creative, more focused, and more effective, right? You have to be able to unplug. Number two, if you don't do that, it's sending a signal to all of your direct line leaders. So let's say CISO, deputy CISO directors, right? So you could be like, go on vacation. No, you should use your vacation, everybody. Oh, come on, teams. And you could be genuinely being supportive of that. But if you don't do it yourself, they're watching what you do. I have 6 kids, right? So they learn way more from what they see us doing as adults than anything, any story or any diatribe that I could give them on. They're watching what we do. Your direct leaders are doing the exact same thing. So you need to do that. There's a third reason, and that's for their growth, right? Like, so if you're my CISO and I'm your deputy CISO, I need to know that you're comfortable that you're on the other side of the world for 10 days on a beach unplugged. And then I've got it. Will I do everything the way that you'll do it? Absolutely not. I won't. Nobody can, right? Will I be at the same level in every single thing? I won't. But I have to have that opportunity to be in the hot seat and to be like, I got this. I can do this, right? And I'm saying me as the deputy CISO, but it's everything on down. It's director to manager, manager to team leader. It has to be that way. So those 3 things are really critical. So that's what I look for is, do you have that? And then, is there a positive culture, right? We can all feel that, right? Culture is values, attitudes, and beliefs, right? Can you talk to me about your values? Can you talk to me about the beliefs of your culture? Because that impacts how we do things, right? Is whether we're building a program or we're solving a problem, your culture comes into play. And if you don't think it comes into play, you're missing it. It's there. It is omnipresent. It is pervasive. And if you don't look at it, then it just happens. It's going to happen with or without you. So when a CISO can talk to me about their culture, the culture of the entity overall, whether they're a public sector or not, nonprofit, but they talk to me about their values, their culture, and then riff on that. And hey, this is kind of how it works in my team. Then, like, we're a super competitive culture and we like doing teams. So we do a lot of team competitions, and here's how that plays out on my team. And I put and I put all my security champions, in a fun competition, and we did a capture the flag. When you start to hear those things, that's an indicator. Like, we got stuff together, right? There's a succession plan. They're investing in their people, and it's fun, right? They're, whatever that culture is, like, they're in the pocket. They're right there, and you can feel that. You're like, you guys got this.
Yeah, I agree with every point you made there again as well. I mean, starting from the first one, if I talk to a leader when I'm coaching people, talking to people, whomever, and they're in cyber and they're leader, and you ask them what the business is focused on, and they don't have an answer to that, they're a tactical leader, right? And they can have this whole long list and they can call it a strategy. It's a roadmap, not a strategy. It is only strategy when it is strategic. And if it's strategic, it is aligned with the business's strategy. It's just the way it works. And that's just something you learn over time. But quite honestly, your roadmap is more successful if it aligns with the business, because you need the business to get things done. Most of what you get done in security, you need IT to do, and IT is aligned with the business, so it's necessary from that perspective. Your point around being able to just go away. I mean, we could have a whole conversation on mental health, psychological
Right.
safety, all that good stuff. More so than anything, it's about the difference between delegation and empowerment. I think at this point, most managers know how to delegate something, whether they just don't have the time to do it, don't want to do it, you name it. It's the empowerment where I see people lagging a little bit. And that empowerment gives people authority.
Mhm.
And that is what a lot of CISOs aren't willing to give up. And quite frankly, it may be a job security reason. But I think your point is spot on. That's where leaders have to develop their teams.
It has to
And
be a program, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing. If you don't have, if you don't have a process, if you don't have a program, and I don't care if it's in a binder, if it's but I mean, if we can't talk about it and you can't tell me over lunch, or we can't do it over a bar napkin, and we can't vibe out and and with a couple other people and do it on whiteboard, then it's not a program. And it's not a knock on that, but you got to get there. It has to be measurable. It has to be repeatable. I have to be able to describe it. You have to be, everybody has to understand what those goals of that are. If not, then because I have seen at times people will mentor the superstar, right, or superstars, right? Not inherently bad. I don't want to ding that. But when I look at training or moving big organizations, which I have, right, it's a little bit of a hot take on this. But what I try to explain to people over the years is, look, that top 10%, like you just do care and feeding and make sure they're supported and make sure they feel enabled, and you let them go because they're just going to go, right, and you give them coaching when they need it and mentoring. When I look at the bell curve, right, the maximal impact that I could have at a program level or at a large scale people level, thousands of people, is moving the middle of the bell curve 5% to the right. And to do that, that's maximal impact. To do that, I got to have a program. I got to have a process. I got to be able to measure it, right? So back to one of the things that I look at when I talk with what I perceive to be the more successful programs. When I talk with a CISO, the metrics they use are different. They're additive. You have those quantitative metrics here, right? I love me some CDM. I love me MITRE, all that stuff, right? Those are quantitative metrics we can argue about. But the intention, right, is those are quantitative metrics. Man, you got to have that. There should be a manager, maybe even a director, somebody who's boom, right in that thing, right? With the threat intel, the vulnerability, and all that stuff. But at the executive level, the metrics that I would expect you to be talking about are the quality of my program, the quality of my program to train my people, and measuring it that way. How are we doing qualitatively? Because when you're in that board meeting, make no mistake, they want your qualitative opinion. That's been my experience over the years. That doesn't mean you don't have the other stuff in an appendix, right? And you got it right there. Because sometimes somebody want to dive down. That's cool. You get somebody's a former CTO and maybe they want to dive down. You need to have that. But that is not where you should be living. You should be living up here and having a qualitative judgment. And those are the metrics I'm looking for. That tells me you've got a mature viewpoint, and you probably have a program and a process that supports those two things. So back to your strategically tactical, it's the same thing, right? Quantitative metrics are tactical. Qualitative metrics are what you get paid for. And
comments for me to look through right now, but I know someone is asking, okay, you've given us this carrot, go after the qualitative metric. What the heck does that look like? We understand mean time to respond. We understand how long it takes to provision somebody, how long it takes to deprovision. We understand like these basic metrics. What is an example of a qualitative metric that you've seen in the past?
sure, I would keep it simple, right? I would say, I've got quantitative metrics below here that I look at, that I use to try to measure the success of the program. And my judgment on that is that we're green, amber, red. I mean, it's literally that simple. I used to brief generals all the time, and I want to tell you, I use gumball charts because you got to do it that way, like at that level, right? You can have all the stuff, but at the end of the day, you just need to tell your opinion. You're the domain expert. You say, hey, look,
Right.
and you set the stage, right? Hey, these are the 4 things you're always going to see from me. Here's how much money we had. Here's how we did last quarter, right? Here's the state of my program and my people, and here's where I'm headed with this. And it's not always going to be, linear 45-degree angle that we would love. It's going to be up or down. I would expect to see that. If I don't ever start to see any kind of, things that aren't perfectly correlated, that also makes me slightly nervous. It's unlikely that it would all be tracking exactly the same way, right? So that's the qualitative judgment. So it's different depending on the company, right? I've worked at places that return on working capital and an assessment of training, like those 2 things were things we all, right? And so I could use those. So I don't think it's a single one, but it needs to be a judgment on how are we doing. That's what you're getting paid to do, right? I could go in there when I ran P&Ls. I had a great finance manager, and I was a new MBA, and I'm like, hey, let's do standard deviation and all this stuff, right? And she was like, hey, I got that. You're going to have that as Appendix A. I got all that for you. That's my bailiwick. They want to know, how are we doing? Where do you think the forecast is actually going to land? That's why I was a young leader. She's like, that's why they pay you. She's like, you're good. Like, I got all the stuff. We got all the metrics. They're there. And I know you know them. They want to know. At the end of the day, you got to make a judgment. Here's how we're doing. What's closest to the pin? That's the truth. That's really how those conversations go.
It's pretty straightforward, but honestly, the simple response is a lot of time the best response given the audience, right? The more complex it is, the less likely it is to land as well. I think we have time for one more question, and you've alluded to your long career in the military, now in private, public, so forth. You've seen the evolution of security. Where we are now, what are some trends that you're seeing in the industry with successful programs?
I think the successful programs align to what we've talked about, right? They've embraced the fact that we don't do security for its own sake, right? Security enables the business. And I know we've had a lot of kind of fluffy talks and there's been pushback around that, but you have to get there. Security has to be an enabler to the business. And the trend that I see is CISOs and aspiring CISOs embracing that and being connected, right? The management walking around, if like we started as a new CISO, right? And going and talking to your peers. Hey, CRO, VP of engineering, like, tell me about your job. Tell me about what you guys do. Tell me what's important. And then they can articulate that and bring that back to the teams. And what they're doing is giving them context. And context is so critical. So I've seen this move from, are you a technical CISO? Are you a business CISO? It's a real binary choice. I'm not a fan of binary choices, right? Daniel Kahneman would say a binary choice is really only one choice, right? It's a choice and it goes one way or the other way, right? And so it's not helpful to people. So he would say, when you're stuck and you feel like it's a binary choice, push those 2 things as far apart on this whiteboard and figure out what could possibly go in between those 2. So I don't think it's business CISO, technical CISO. I don't think it's 50-50. That's unrealistic to me too. It's a rheostat. On any given day, where do I need to be leaning in? And today, and then what do I need to do to build capacity for the future to make sure that when it goes to 11, we can get to 11. And when it goes back to 5, we can go to 5. And so what I see is that the CISOs are transforming while they're being transformational. And I'm stealing that phrase from an article I just read. Right. I just read an article in the MIT Sloan management, so I want to give them credit. And it was the whole magazine. It's this month's magazine, by the way, is all about leadership, leadership and transformation. But that phrase got me, right? Because we've talked a lot about being transformational, digital transformation, all the things, AI, big data, cloud, all this. I love all that stuff, right? That's transformational, but that's about process. It's about outcomes, right? You have to transform at the same time, right? I'm going to be telling you where we're headed, why we're headed there, and at the same time, I've got to be transforming. I've got to be continuing to grow, continuing to learn, and you should see that from me. You should see me saying, I'm going to have to be vulnerable. Hey, I did some EQ assessments. And here's what I got to lean into in 2023. I am not great at insert vulnerable thing here. They need to see that from you because that indicates you're transforming also at the same time.
I think that's the perfect end. Vulnerability, willingness to grow, willingness to understand that you are fallible, and growth is on the other end of that acceptance. I think is a perfect ending. I like to end the show with a question that I ask every guest.
Sure.
I believe words matter. I believe one of our challenges with getting things accomplished is a disconnect between what we say and what people hear. And so I like to use metaphors and analogies to get my points across. I'd love to hear an analogy or a metaphor that you like to use when talking about security, any topic.
Yeah, so I would say, I try to bring it down to, how I would have a conversation with my own kids, and why is cybersecurity important? And I like to talk about the idea that you have to be engaged, and you have a piece of that, which is the security. But the other people that are involved are also doing securing, right? So I can set up the table and make sure that you've got guards and you have locks and you have cameras, but at the end of the day, you actually have to lock the door. And that's kind of how I explain it to like my kids and the people, in my own family, right? So it's two pieces of this, right? If you think just security on security, then it will always be this lopsided, situation. But if you think of, I have a piece of this, I have a role to play in that, then that's the securing piece that each of us individually have to take care of.
Thank you. I think that's a really simple one for everybody to grasp. Dutch Schwartz, everybody. I'm glad we can make the time to have this conversation. It was long overdue. And everybody out there, thank you for attending.
Thanks, Jerich.